Good morning. This is Allison Pena. Thank you for connecting, and welcome to today's webinar program, Policy Flexibility, Too Much or Not Enough, sponsored by Sirva. Before we begin, please take a moment to review Worldwide ERC's webinar disclaimer. And now I would like to go over a few housekeeping announcements. If you are experiencing technical difficulties joining the WebEx session today, please dial 866-779-3239 from the U.S. Email questions may be sent to support@webex.com. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. If you have a question during the presentation, you may submit it online at any time. To submit your question, please use the Q&A tab, which is located in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. Simply click on the tab and type your question into the dialog box at the bottom of the screen and then click the Send button. Please note that all written questions selected during this webinar will be answered publicly. Lastly, a link to the course evaluation and to the page where you can access the handout and recording of this session will be included in an email scheduled to go out later this afternoon. Please be on the lookout for it. It will come to you from messenger@webex.com. During this webinar, we will be polling the audience at times. When a poll is opened, it will appear in the polling dialog box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, below the Q&A box. The question will appear in both the slide and polling dialog box. Simply select your answer and click Submit. The results will display in the same dialog box once the poll is closed. This webinar is worth 1 CRP and 1 GMS credit. If you are a GMS seeking CE credit for this webinar, you must include the name and date of this event on your GMS renewal application at the time you apply for recertification. The renewal application is available online. Please note that crediting procedures for the CRP designation have changed, as well as accessibility to the archived session. If you hold your CRP designation, credit will be added to your record automatically within a week of this program. Attendees must be registered and attend the full meeting to receive credit. The archived webinar session will be available to all for the next month and available to Worldwide ERC members for the second month. After 2 months, our Premier Learning Portal subscribers can continue to view this session for up to 2 years. CRPs who log in and view the archived session will also receive continuing education credit automatically upon completion of the session. Credit processing fees for webinars will no longer be collected. HRCI information is also noted here. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. Taryn Kramer, Vice President of Global Consulting at Sirva, has over 20 years of experience in the global mobility space, including expatriate tax preparation, international assignment program management and administration, and global mobility strategy and transformation consulting. Taryn has participated in projects to design and or redesign and implement global mobility programs for multinational organizations. Taryn has also served as a training facilitator covering global mobility marketplace trends and best practices for internal and external learning courses. Kathy Burrows has more than 22 years of experience in global relocation, real estate, and account management. As Director of Global Consulting, Kathy works with current and potential clients to ensure that their mobility programs are providing the support and governance necessary to align with defined organizational and talent objectives and priorities. Her experience provides a depth of knowledge that enables her to blend talent management, program governance, and mobility objectives with operations excellence to support a client's vision of mobility support. Kathy holds both the Certified Relocation Professional and Global Mobility Specialist designations from Worldwide ERC and has been a 2-time recipient of Sirva's Leadership Award in Client-Centric Performance. I am delighted to welcome both Taryn and Kathy. Thank you for joining us. I will now turn the program over to Taryn. Taryn, I'm not hearing you.
Hi. Is that better?
There we go. Now I'm hearing you.
There we go. All right. There we go. Thank you, Allison. I appreciate it and appreciate everyone's patience as we work through some of the technical challenges that always exist. As always, we appreciate the opportunity to partner with ERC to deliver these webinars. Kathy and I both are part of Sirva's global consulting practice. And as Allison said, we work with existing clients and potential clients to design and implement improvements into their mobility functions. Today, our webinar is all about program flexibility and whether or not there's too much flexibility built into your program or not enough. Our objectives for the webinar are really to introduce some concepts or to reconfirm some concepts and to talk about different things that you all as mobility leaders should consider as you look at reevaluating or designing your mobility program from scratch. Flexibility in mobility programs today is a key theme that we are seeing permeating most of the conversations that we have with mobility leaders, as well as folks that are administering mobility programs. Mobility programs need to be flexible enough to accommodate the investment or cost constraints or requirements that are placed on the program as part of the organizational priorities, as well as considering business or manager preferences and employee preferences and priorities. This really is a buyer's market when it comes to employee relocation. Employees have more and more clout when it comes to developing packages that are better suited to their needs and preferences, as well as the needs and preferences of any accompanying family. Flexibility in a mobility program is about removing the barriers to relocation, particularly when you're talking about critical talent, where mobility is required for succession planning, or instances where local resources are not an option to fill a role in that destination or host location. We jump right into our first polling question. So what is the biggest problem you face in supporting a global workforce? A, balancing cost with experience. B, policy structure. C, length of time to make decisions or obtain buy-in. D, confusion regarding different support options available, or E, something else. This is a question, so we've been running a series of workshops, and this is one question that we ask when people register. We're seeing a lot of consistency and themes in terms of the responses. So we've pulled some of the key ones that we've seen as part of some informal polling that Sirva has been managing and thought we would pop it out to this group. We've got about 15 seconds left before the results are available. And we recognize that sometimes it's a bit of a challenge to narrow it down just to kind of one big problem, but we're really looking to better understand what's the primary thing that's keeping you up at night or that you're struggling with in terms of administering or developing or introducing some improvements to your program. So we've got there we go. We've got the results in. So it looks like balancing cost with experience. So option A is really the top challenge that people respond to. We kind of fall down in kind of level of how they're listed here: policy structure, length of time to make decisions, obtain buy-in, and then confusion regarding the different support options. And that dichotomy between option A and B is really the focus of today's webinar. You want to make sure that you are investing the right amount of support to, again, remove the barriers to relocation, but sometimes less is more. Sometimes offering too much flexibility or giving mobility leaders or stakeholders too many options within a program just ends up creating confusion and a sense potentially of inequity when it comes to the level of support that's provided to different individuals. So similar to what we're hearing based on the results of the poll, these are some snippets of real responses that we've received as some of the informal polling, again, that Sirva is doing around what people are really struggling with. You'll see some key themes here around policy flexibility, policy structure, balancing cost experience, technology availability. When we talk about, being able to provide flexibility, Some of that ties directly back to, being able to access information, whether you are a relocating employee or whether you're a mobility program leader, being able to access real-time information about the status of a relocation, or to provide information or education or guidance to employees in situations where they've been given the discretion to make some decisions around the spend or the investment that's made for their package. Length of time it takes to get information for decision making, again, a consistent theme that we've been seeing for a while now. That runway of time just to get things off the ground is often much longer than anticipated, and some of that does tie back to the level or lack of flexibility that you have within your program. We see some programs where the exception process takes an exorbitant amount of time, and part of that is due to just potentially the number of stakeholders involved in that decision-making process, but also potentially the lack of clarity in terms of what the intent is of any particular support component, and the discretion to make some decisions where an additional level of support is provided in an instance. Flexibility impacts experience. So program flexibility will absolutely impact the experience, not just of the relocating employee, but as well as any accompanying family. So when we talk about employee experience, we really like to position it in terms of, again, not just the employee, but also any accompanying family. Rather than taking a narrow view of the inclusion or exclusion of package support as mobility investment or a cost driver, we really like to think of package design as the development of the mobility experience for the relocating employee and their family. So what you're looking at here is just an example, of how a program might be structured. You may be able to kind of segment your population or break up your mobility population based on, first and foremost, what is driving that relocation. You may then have an additional criteria level when you look at employee level. So, someone that's more senior in their career may be entitled to, or may be put in a bucket where the level of support is a bit more robust than someone who's maybe very early on in their career, or, an intern just out of college. But then we really look at this third component of experience, so where either the manager or the business leader or the employee has the discretion to then select their experience or adjust their experience. And that's really, when we talk about that, that's talking about all the different package components that go into a particular employee package. We really see four key areas where flexibility can be introduced into a mobility program, specifically the policy. So first and foremost, it's at the policy component level. So is something included in a policy, or is it excluded from a policy? You then have options to determine the level of support that's provided. Temporary living is probably one of the easiest examples that we can use here. So first and foremost, are you including temporary living support in your package? Are you not including it? In instances where you are including it, you have the option to do a best, better, good. So a good experience for temporary living, maybe 15 days. A better experience, maybe 30. The best experience, maybe 60 days. You then have some options around flexibility around how that support is delivered. Good is the individual just getting a lump sum of money, where they have to go out and source that temporary living or find hotel or, an Airbnb or a long-term accommodation on their own based on funds provided by the company. A better experience may be giving them that lump sum of money to pay for that temporary living, but providing them access to a preferred network of vendors, where potentially they're able to take advantage of some purchasing power, because you're not just purchasing as an individual consumer, you're purchasing based on, the fact that the vendor is getting lots of business from a particular client or company. Or the best, and again, just an example, but the best would be to directly coordinate that temporary living from the mobility program administrative side on behalf of that employee. So the employee is given options around what temporary living they can stay in. They're able to make that selection, but all the booking and invoicing and everything is done directly with the company. The employee does not see any of that. The fourth level of flexibility that we see is around choice or discretion. Who has the ability to make decisions around what's in a package versus not in a package? Is it the manager, the business, or is it the employee? Most commonly on the global side, so when we're talking about international cross-border moves, there's not a whole lot of discretion that's provided to the employee when it comes to developing a package. For U.S. domestic moves, we do see a little bit more flexibility provided to the employee. Some of that is just tied to the delivery mechanism. So again, where an employee is getting a lump sum that makes up either some or part of their kind of flex components of their package, they do have that discretion or that flexibility on either to purchase relocation support or to just take those funds and allocate them elsewhere. But again, really four key components or areas where we can have flexibility built into a mobility program. So what is Core Flex? And it's a really interesting question, I think, these days. And I think that we at Sirva think about it a little bit differently. Core Flex, when in the conversations that we have with mobility leaders that are looking to redesign or implement programs, when they come to us and say, I'd like to build a Core Flex program, it's always interesting for us to go back and say, what do you mean by Core Flex? Because I think there are a multitude of interpretations of Core Flex that exist within the market. So even amongst our industry, we don't necessarily have a very clear definition of what Core Flex means and the way that it's applied within different programs. We have lots of programs that we work with that we do classify as Core Flex, but no two are the same, right? They're very different across the board. Some of the pros of a Core Flex program, and we'll go into some different examples of how we see Core Flex programs structured. You have the ability to meet both the company and the employee needs. That flex component really allows you to look at the different priorities of the employee or the different preferences of the employee. It allows you to treat the relocation, is not a one-size-fits-all. Different families have different needs when they relocate. Employees have different preferences around how to allocate spend, where they have some of that flexibility. So it really does allow some movement there. From a company perspective, you may have business units where cost is not an issue or is not a primary consideration when it comes to relocating individuals. You may have other business units that are subject to more heavier cost constraints. So being able to have some flexibility within your program while still providing a core level of support for employees is critical in order to enable workforce deployment across all your business units or across your organization as a whole. The Core Flex approach allows for the ability to control some relocation costs, particularly in instances where you are deploying or delivering a lump sum. That's an amount that you understand. You know exactly what that spend is going to be. On the kind of the con side of that, we do see obviously an impact around the employee experience where they're kind of given a lump sum and left to their own devices to manage their relocation. They essentially then become their relocation coordinator or manager, and they don't always have the knowledge or expertise or, quite frankly, the time to devote to managing their relocation. So there definitely are some implications there around some failed moves. It reduces exceptions in the no factor, so never going to eliminate exceptions from a program altogether. But again, building in some flexibility, some discretion into your program really allows for stakeholders and approvers within the process to make some decisions based on what the employee actually needs versus a very rigid, this is our program, and if it doesn't fit within that, then it's an exception. Offers flexibility as the relocation progresses. So in some cases where you have some flex components where either the business or the employee is making some selections, depending on some of the selections that they make early on in the relocation process, that may change or adjust their needs as they work through the whole process. So it's not a package that's necessarily set in stone from day one. It really does flex as the employee moves through that process. And it can be a way to attract some younger talent or some younger generational talent, giving them that freedom or flexibility to really allocate relocation funds the way in which they prefer. Often this is a group that's very readily mobile. They don't necessarily, if they're super early in their career, they don't necessarily have significant ties to a particular location, or families or large families at all. So they're often readily mobile, in which case providing them some flexibility or some freedom in terms of the package design is a draw for them. We talked a little bit about the cons when it comes to a lump sum. I think these core flex programs, for those of you that are joining us from the kind of the RMC side or from the vendor side, we drive our process based on consistency, and this concept of a core flex program where every package potentially is different or customized for the employee really provides some challenges in terms of how you manage that program from a vendor side. Tracking program metrics becomes difficult because not everyone is receiving the same level of support or the same nature of support. So understanding satisfaction levels, is a poor satisfaction rating because the employee made some poor decisions around the support that they should be receiving, or potentially the manager or the business made some poor decisions, because there's too much flexibility or there wasn't enough guidance provided throughout the program in order to help them make some of those decisions around what the employee really needs for a successful relocation. Aligning with culture. So again, in considering kind of a core flex program, it really is important to look at your company culture. You want to make sure that your mobility program is a reflection of your company or your corporate culture. Mobility is an enabler within any organization to deploy your workforce and to meet some talent and, career development and resource needs. So you want to make sure that, again, your mobility program is reflective of the way in which some of your other HR or employee-focused policies operate. So we kind of had fun putting this slide together because, there's a perspective that really today all programs are core flex programs. On the far left, you have a visual that I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have seen already, where it's talking about program segmentation and really looking at what's driving the relocation of an individual. And then being able to bucket or allocate support based on that move driver. So your future leaders in that top right-hand box wouldn't necessarily be getting or shouldn't be getting the same level of support as someone who's raising their hand and saying, I want to move. That's a core flex program. You're adjusting the level of support that's provided to your employees based primarily on that move driver. Typically, there then are some other eligibility criteria that fall within each of those different categories, whether it's employee level or performance history, or potentially where the individual is coming from or moving to, or the duration of that move. That really will drive some decisions around the package, and that you then can have, you have some core components, and then you definitely have some flexibility in there. The middle is another example where you can kind of move up the spectrum in terms of the package that's provided. You could have a very basic, starting at the top, compliance-only program. So perhaps for your self-select employees where they're raising their hand to move, perhaps on the domestic side, maybe they're only getting some gross-up support. where they have some additional relocation expenses, or for the global, tax and immigration support on a very limited basis. You then can move up the spectrum for relocation packages, but potentially on the low or kind of the bare minimum that's needed to provide the employee with what they need to relocate, moving up through a more robust program, and then to your kind of your full service relocation program. Then with the opportunity, if you look at the very last circle down there, to add some enhanced benefits. So if there's a need to add some additional incentives or motivators for the employee to accept that relocation, your program allows for that flexibility or that opportunity to do so. The far right is another example of how a program can be designed. You have core benefits that are provided to the employee, most commonly specific to compliance, household goods, and potentially some final move expenses and maybe some temporary living. So, you define your core benefits, but then you have flexible benefits. Sometimes those flexible benefits are delivered in the form of points. So an employee would have X amount of points to pick from a menu or a list of services, where each of those different services has a particular number of points assigned to that service. So temp living may be 4 points, whereas, final move airfare, if it's not part of the core, maybe 2 points. You have other programs where they operate on caps. So you have your core benefits, and then the employee is given a capped budget of, call it $50,000, to then select some additional relocation support. Again, how that cap is defined can impact the employee experience. Our recommendation where companies use caps is really to say, what is the intent of the company to cover via that cap, and price out the different services that you're intending to cover, so that that cap is really reflective of some actual or some realistic costs, versus just coming up with a number that's globally consistent or regionally or locally consistent based on where the individual is moving to. We then have the lump sum approach, which I know a lot of us have been talking about lately, where the employee just gets a lump sum of money that's intended to cover some additional relocation support. The cap and the lump sum, very similar concept, although typically when it comes to the lump sum, there's no accountability required for the employee. There's no requirement for them to utilize that lump sum towards relocation expenses. It is really about just giving them that lump of money, that lump of cash, and then they can do with it what they want. Obviously, it's recommended that they use it for relocation expenses, but there's no requirement to submit receipts or anything like that. The CAP program is different, still the same concept that you can absolutely identify the value or the budget for that move, but then it becomes a bit of a declining balance based on the receipts that the employee submits. And you can designate that those that money must be used for relocation support. It can't be used to go and purchase a new TV or something like that. And then this menu item, where you have here your core benefits, and then here's a menu of additional support that you can provide or that you can select. Sometimes it's a use it or lose it. There may be 5 menu items on there that are available for the employee. They don't have to use all 5, but they can use all 5. Sometimes it might be a bit of a pick list, right, to say there's 5 items on that list. You can pick 3 of those. But there's not necessarily a cap on the spend there, as long as they stay within the different menu items that are available. And even within this example, you can you can see some overlap. You may have the menu item, but where it's based on points, right? So you have that menu, but they're given a particular number of points in order to manage. So we'll move in. So our second polling question is now, if your program includes flex benefits, who has the discretion to select those benefits? The employee, the manager, or the business, unsure, or you do not have flex benefits within your program. So we'll give you guys a little bit of time to take a peek at that and answer that question. We have some stats that we'll share with you following the results of our poll that we got from an annual report that we do at Sirva, and it'll be interesting to see how that aligns. Again, I think some of maybe the difference or some of the responses that we'll see may differ based on the scope of the program that you manage, whether it's a global program or whether it's a domestic program. We absolutely see some differences there in terms of allowing employee flexibility or employee discretion, I should say, versus the manager discretion. So it looks like our results are about to pop up. So let's see. Let me just refresh. Looks like it might be a little bit frozen. Allison, I don't know if you, oh, here we go. Okay. Yeah, so the majority of responses are indicating that it's the manager or the business that has the discretion to make decisions there. And, you know, probably about 50% less 50% fewer programs allow the employee to make those decisions. And that syncs up with what, with some other polling that we at Sirva have done. We found when we asked the exact same question that 61% of the discretion was provided to the business leader or HR, 27%, and we didn't have this as a list as an option here, but 27% went to global mobility. So global mobility was empowered to make some of the decisions around the level or the nature of support that's provided. And in our survey, which the results from this poll are much higher, but for our survey it was under 4% where the assignee or the employee was able to make some decisions. Here we're looking at about kind of 20 some odd percent that the employee was able to make some decisions. So interesting, and it's again, it's one of those components that needs to be considered when you design your program in terms of who has the discretion to make some decisions around what is and is not included in any relocation package, as well as the level or the nature of support of that, of what's included. Kat, if you're talking, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent, thanks. So it's a segue into our next discussion of who should have that flexibility. Should it be the employee or should it be the business? And so there's really benefits and challenges to both options. And so when you have the employee having the discretion for benefits, you know, what makes that attractive for the employee is that they really have the flexibility to define how they're going to apply financial support that's provided. They can design their own packages based upon their own priorities and their own family needs and preferences. They're not being dictated on how they are to use their funds or how they're going to move and apply relocation benefits. And then they can also have a very customized program, which is really attractive to folks versus a one-size-fits-all, and you must have these benefits, you must follow this timeline, you must follow these particular rules. Folks really like to have the opportunity to have some input into that process and some flexibility on how activities are going to happen for them in the mobility space. Challenges that come up when the employee has the flexibility to define their own program and manage some of their benefits is that obviously they become the manager of some of the relocation. So they become their own relocation consultant. So there can be some challenges for folks that have never relocated before or don't understand the tasks that are involved with securing some of the benefits or services that they are now having to do themselves. So there can be a little bit of a lack of the clarity of that relocation process. So in a traditional program, the timeline is very succinct, it's very laid out, certain activities happen at certain times. The employee is responsible for it. That timeline can get a little muddy sometimes if there's not clear guidance. So in some programs, we see that there's really good support for the employee with materials and online tools to help them navigate through that self-support. But if they don't have that additional support, it really gets kind of tough for them sometimes and can be a challenge. We also have seen instances where an inexperienced person will potentially use funds in the wrong way or mismanage their funds, where they will not allocate funds for particular activities that they'll need, will use all their funds up in one activity. So again, inexperience and the process for managing that allocation of funds can get complicated for some people. Some people really like it, and some people will find it very challenging for them. That really ties into the employee experience. So your corporate population may really like this flexibility and thrive on it, where some others may have some challenges with it. And then the last piece is the purchasing power. When the employee is out securing services themselves and going out on a cash basis, they don't get the benefit of leveraging the purchasing of the relocation center. In some cases, they may be paying more for some services than had they had a supported program. And when you have a business discretion where the business has the flexibility, it's really exciting for the business, and it's attractive because they have the ability to design packages the way that they want to. And a lot of times the focus is around how much they want to spend. So they're able to provide some cost management for their programs. They're allowed to create a better experience for some employees. They can scale back the experience for the employees. So as they're looking at moving different types of people and different drivers behind the moves, they have the ability to kind of flex with that and provide either more support or less support depending upon the experience they want to give or how much money that they want to spend. And they still get to leverage the purchasing power of the relocation company and vendors as well too, which is nice. Now, some of the challenges that may come into place is that there's too much focus on the budget and that the experience of the employee and the specific needs of the employee get kind of lost in the process. So you may find that sometimes in these types of programs, the budgets are really tight, the package offerings are really small, the employee needs aren't taken into effect. So that really ties into the experience of the employee in kind of a negative perspective. And then sometimes we also find that there may be relationship influences on packages. So some managers may be known for providing better packages or more support. So it may be who you know or who's your manager will define what your benefits are versus understanding the needs that you have or what the organization's goals are for having a mobility program in place. So as you're looking at your current program, or if you're considering adding some flexibility, this would be some good spots to take a look at to see what meshes well with your corporate culture and what things you need to consider when you're starting to look to apply flexibility. So we do have a polling question next for you. And are you seeing a shift in the makeup of your mobility move type? Yes, no, or unsure. So are you looking at your organization and saying, you know, we typically have permanent moves, short-term moves, long-term moves? Are we still seeing that those are what our businesses need? Do we see a shift of different types of moves, those extended business travelers? Are we seeing a need for short-term assignments? Are we seeing a need for rotational types of programs? We've had a lot of organizations coming to the table and saying, what kind of options do we have? What different ways can we design packages that might meet business needs better than our traditional tools of a short-term, long-term, and permanent move? And that applies not just for global cross-border moves, but for domestic moves, regardless of what country that you're going into. So let's see what our poll says here. It's kind of stuck for me too, Taryn.
Just a sec. It could take about 5 more seconds to come up.
All right, great. And once we get the polling questions here, we'll compare those against some information that Sirva's been able to collect. Oh, very good. Here we go. So from the group on the call, we have yes, over 60%. And then we have just about under 20% said no, and we have a small group of folks that are unsure. And this is right in line with what we're seeing across the board with most folks that we're talking to. From a global perspective, from our annual report, our participants have indicated that there's a shift, that they're seeing an increase of 41% in the use of short-term assignments for the future versus what they have seen in the past. And that extended business trips as well are increasing. So the businesses are finding these types of alternative programs really attractive for a lot of different reasons. So from a cost perspective, they're definitely cheaper than going with a permanent move or a long-term assignment. But the businesses are also tending to send different types of people on assignments. So it's not just your senior leadership or your core strategic folks that are going on assignments or moving. It is your lower level people. We have project people, we have implementation people, we have people that are looking to get better experiences and get talent experiences overseas to build their resume and their career within an organization. So from a developmental standpoint, they're looking for different ways to get those people deployed and for those initiatives handled within the business. So we did also provide a pulse survey of recently, and we found that even there, the business travelers, that's increased to 53% versus the 44% that was reported last year. So then when we look at domestic moves, there is a lot of interest in domestic temporary assignment moves. And over the last 2 years, we've been asked to brush off old temporary domestic assignments and create new temporary domestic assignment policies just because these have become more attractive. So our annual survey showed an increase of 20% of these types of programs. And then when we did take our pulse survey, that's gone up to 23% for domestic assignments. But keep in mind, that doesn't mean that your one-way moves stop. We're also seeing through our pulse survey that the one-way relocations are expecting an increase of 30%. So what it's really doing in some cases is not replacing permanent moves with temporary assignments, but the business is finding that temporary assignments allow them to open up mobility and business expansion to different levels of employees that would typically have not been considered for a relocation, and using them. So you might find that your program actually increases in the number of types of moves versus replacing permanent moves with temporary moves. So I do have another polling question for the audience today. When you look at your organization, what is driving the change in move types for you? When you look at your population and your business needs, is it the minimization of costs or the rationalization of the costs of your programs today? Is it the employees and their preference? Are they now having a more vocal voice of what types of moves they want to do? Do they prefer to go on assignments that are shorter? Do they prefer to go on business trips? Are they less hesitant to take the long-term assignments? Is your organization really looking to develop talent in different ways? And is your business looking for solutions to help them develop their talent and deploy them in different ways within the world? Increased candidate pool. Do you have a broader spectrum of people that you need to service by your program than you do today? Are you having compliance requirements? Are you finding that you have this stealth group of business travelers that now needs to be managed with more compliance? Do you have organizational changes or other things happening within your company that would influence it? So let's take a look at what our survey has said for us.
About 6, 5, 4.
I'm excited to see what they have to say, because all of these have been really good conversations that we've had with clients. Oh, wow. 49% is cost minimization, rationalization, very interesting. And then organizational change is also at 15%. And then we have some groups that are not seeing any changes. And then the other options are just small fractions of the population. Very good. So when we look at the changing drivers for move types in some of the surveys that Sirva has provided, again, we're right in alignment with you. 57% of participants have indicated that they're looking to change their move types based upon the fact that the business is looking for different ways to provide mobility support and have it be a little bit cheaper and more cost effective for them. Talent development has been the second one at 46%. Again, looking for different ways to move talent to grow them within the organization with outside of their traditional type of policy. Organizational change at 41%, so that matches in with our second highest here at 15%. And then the wider talent pool at 39%. Employee preference is only tracking at 19%. And then the compliance pieces at 18%. So when you're looking to provide flexibility within your program and you're considering giving the employee flexibility and you're considering giving the managers flexibility with program design, there needs to be kind of a balance of it. And so regardless of which approach you take, it's really important to be keeping your eyes and ears open for how it's performing for you. So some of the things that you can kind of keep your eyes out for, if your program doesn't have enough flexibility, it would be common for your program to have a lot of exception requests where the business wants to take benefits out, add benefits in. You have noise from the employees that they need more support. If you have a poor customer experience from either the employee not getting enough support or the support is just not meeting their needs, that could tell you that you need a little bit more flexibility. Or if the business, as your internal customer, is having some challenges with the experience of the packages and the way that you have the support set up is just not meeting their needs as well, you may need more flexibility with your program. Programs that don't have enough support or not as flexible could have some impacts of failed relocations where not enough support was given to them or the appropriate support wasn't given to them. So the actual assignment or the relocation fails and you lose that person, or you have to bring them back from the assignment early. You could see that you've got overspend for your program where you're spending more for benefits via exceptions and things like that. If your program isn't flexible enough and you're having a lot of those exceptions, you're also having a lot of administration time that is spent administering those exception requests and having the conversations with the employee or the business to handle the objections that are coming up. So you're going to have that additional spend that you would possibly be seeing, which then is a burden on your resources. So it's your internal resources, it's your manager's time that's taken up for it, it's the additional time taken up with your relocation vendor. So that, again, is another indicator that you don't have enough flexibility with your program. And then if you're getting feedback from your recruiters and your managers that they're just not able to get the right talent in the door, they can't get people to take assignments or move, they can't get people on board within the company, or they're losing talent to other companies based upon relocation packages, it may also be a sign that your program is not flexible enough in meeting the needs of either the employee or the business. You could also go to the other side where you have too much flexibility within a program. And so some things that might give you some red lights that you've got some problems with too much flexibility is that there's confusion. Confusion on the side of the managers. What should I offer? How does this work, the flexible program? If they have a really tough time designing packages or determining what benefits folks get, that can give you some insight that there's too much flexibility to the program. If you're also finding that there's a lot of inequity with how the programs are being administered, with what benefits are being provided, that could also tell you that you have too much flexibility within the manager experience to provide support. If you have also feedback that the employee is having a poor experience because they were given so much flexibility, but they didn't know how to manage the flexibility that they were given, they were not able to allocate funds correctly, they were not able to secure services correctly and relocate. They ended up spending a lot more time on facilitating the move rather than actually arriving and working on the new position. Those are all signs that you could potentially have too much flexibility within your program. And keep in mind, when you have flexibility, sometimes it does require you to change the way that you administer your program and the internal support. So if you do find that your administration spend is too much and you're spending a lot of time creating packages and helping managers and helping employees, it may be a sign as well that it's too flexible and you may need to scale back a little bit and provide a little bit more guidance to make that flexibility more user-friendly for the experience and for the time that it takes to administer. And when you have poor experience and you have confusion and inequity happening within a program, it really affects your mobility brand within the organization. So you do want to make sure that if you're starting to have that feedback, it could negatively affect your brand as well within the organization. So take a look at that as well. And then again, if you have program exceptions, and a lot of them, it could also mean that you have too much flexibility. where you gave flexibility and people misused the benefits in place, and now you're having to approve additional benefits for folks after the fact that can also add to that additional spend. So again, just some things to consider. For those of you that have flexible programs in place, some of these may resonate with you, but as you're considering putting a flexible program in place, these are some things to take a look at. So as we round out our discussion today on flexible programs, how much is enough, how much is too much, it really comes down to, three basic thoughts as you walk away from today's session, is really understanding what's important to you, the mobility team, and your employees and your culture. It's really defining a balance of flexibility that meets the employee's needs and the company's needs at the same time. It's really taking a look at the demographics of what types of people that you're moving. What type of deployment is your organization working on? Are you expanding and you're sending strategic folks to locations? Does your company do a lot of project work? What levels of individuals are being deployed to what different locations? That will help you understand what level of flexibility you should provide and where that flexibility should lie, whether it should be with the employee or with the business. And then again, remember, flexibility will impact the effectiveness of your program. So a lot of times people will take a look at flexibility from the program or the component level, but you really need to look at the overall arching support that you as mobility will provide for that whole process and how the flexibility plays into that administration of your program. Taryn, anything else you can think of as we look to close out the discussion today?
We've had some really good questions that have started to come in as we've been talking. So we've got a little bit of time. Please continue to send in your questions. I think Allison referenced at the beginning that even if we don't answer your question during the discussion today, Kathy and I do get copies of those questions. So we will make sure that we're responding to them as soon as we possibly can. But some of the questions that came in, do you find companies that use flex benefits are also using some programs or resources to ensure that the employee is smart about the choices that they make? Unfortunately, that hasn't really been the process traditionally. So where programs are using a lump sum approach and expecting or anticipating that the employee will just go out and purchase relocation services on their own, there typically is not a whole lot of support that's provided to the employee to really help guide them through that process. That's starting to change. Anytime that we're working with an organization to design a program where a lump sum is either a component of that support or the full support altogether, so a lump sum only package, we absolutely encourage as much education and access to resources available for the employee. In many instances, this can be the first and only time that an employee may move. And they don't understand necessarily all the logistics behind it. They don't necessarily understand what they actually need versus what they think they need. They also may not have realistic expectations around what certain services are going to cost. So anytime you're offering a lump sum component to your employees, we strongly recommend that you provide, again, as much education as possible. In terms of, we got a question around how you determine where lump sums are used as part of that flex component, how you determine that lump sum. Our recommendation is always that lump sum is determined using some sort of calculator that considers the origin and destination location as well as the family. Now, obviously, there are programs that don't take that approach, that look at the program and just, assign a value for all of your moves, whether they're domestic moves or global moves. But we always would recommend that there's some sort of calculation or formula that sits behind that lump sum. Part of that is also defining what is intended to be covered by that lump sum. So, are you just allowing the employee to use it for whatever they need, or are you going to put that lump sum value in front of them and say, these are the, the 5 elements or the 4 elements that we recommend you apply your lump sum to for purchasing relocation support. Kat, maybe one of the questions for you, how do you find the right balance in a flex program if your mobility program is very junior or very kind of new and developing?
Yeah, and a lot of that comes down to corporate culture. So we'll sometimes see companies take kind of a phased approach to flexibility. We've seen some companies take a flexible approach initially with benefits that are reimbursable items. So instead of having the employee submit for like a home finding trip in their final move, they get a lump sum to cover those expenses. And so they kind of test the waters out a little bit to see how the employee likes to have that kind of flexibility with benefits, and then move a little further if they like that and that they find that there is appetite for additional self-service support, then they move a little bit farther with offering, potentially, here is, $5,000. You have these 5 additional benefits that you can use depending upon what your needs are. You can have like an extra trip home during the relocation process. You can ship your pets. You can use the funds for family support. Again, allowing a clear-cut budget for the business, which is nice, but allowing some flexibility for the employee to make some choices of how they apply those dollars that the business is really comfortable providing. From the business side of the equation, we have some organizations that, based upon how they structure other benefits and the way that managers are able to pick support for different types of benefits for an employee, it's more of an a la carte kind of build option. So in those cases, something, a program of a lot of flexibility marries up with some of the already existing culture within an organization. It also depends on how many managers you have. If you have thousands of managers, or if you just have a handful of managers making a relocation decision, you also have to take that into account as far as being able to explain how a process works and have managers understand how to apply the flexibility as well. That should also be a consideration when kind of taking a look at which approach to take. Hopefully that helps, Taryn. We also had another one I see that came up that asked if there could be manager and employee flexibility within a program, and yes, it doesn't have to be employee flexibility only or manager flexibility. You can have a program where the manager can control a little bit of their budget and the experience, and then you also give the employee some flexibility, like in the example I said earlier, where there's a lump sum instead of a reimbursement, or pick a few benefits based upon a budget. You could do a combination of programs as well, too.
Okay. Maybe one final question. How do you factor the tax portion in the element offered to the employee? So very interesting question. I think first and foremost, as a program, you need to define whether you are grossing up costs or whether you are paying those costs net to the employee. So in other words, is the company bearing the tax consequence of that support? And then just in communicating to the employee that approach. So if they're operating on a defined budget, where they're able to spend those funds in a declining balance, making sure that they understand whether that's a gross or a net budget, because if not, they would then have to put aside some of those funds to cover any incidental tax or incremental, I should say, tax consequences of the support that's provided to them. Because whether it's delivered directly to the employee or paid to them as an allowance, it will be considered compensation and will most likely be taxable for the employee. So you'll want to make sure that there's education around that for them so that they can appropriately allocate funds to cover those tax expenses where it's their responsibility.
Okay, great. Well, thank you to both Taryn and Kathy for an excellent presentation. We really appreciate you sharing your insights with us today. And I'd also like to offer a very special thank you to Sirva for their sponsorship of this webinar. You all have been a wonderful audience. Some great questions were asked, and I will definitely get those questions over to Taryn and Kathy because I know some of them weren't able to be answered. I hope you've enjoyed the program. A quick reminder, please keep an eye on the Worldwide ARC website. We're constantly adding new events, and watch your emails for an email containing links to a course evaluation and to the page where you can access the handout and recording of this session. It will come to you from messenger@webex.com. Thank you all again. Have a great afternoon, and you may now disconnect.